Hello, welcome to today's ATARC webinar on the federal workforce. My name is Jonathan Albaum, and I'm the federal CTO at ServiceNow, and I have the pleasure of being today's moderator. We all know that COVID dramatically changed the way that federal employees work. With higher numbers of remote and hybrid employees and the challenges of creating interpersonal relationships with virtual work and the ongoing pressures of the Great Resignation, many of us are wondering how federal agencies are utilizing technology to meet these workforce needs. And with the focus of on the federal worker in the president's management agenda, there's been a loud call for upskilling and diversifying the federal workforce. And this requires a fresh perspective on the entire hiring and training process. Before joining ServiceNow, I spent many years as a technology leader in the federal government. And I know that to do their best work, federal employees need to feel secure that leadership understands and is addressing concerns related to safety, access to technology, and how they interact with their colleagues. And I think this is a clear call for agencies to provide tools and self-service capabilities to help people do their jobs best. And as we continue this workplace transformation, I think we all have to think about the IT modernization strategies that are going to work best. How can technology change the way federal employees experience their jobs and how they serve their customers? And where should we focus? And how do we know if we've been successful? We have a terrific lineup of experts from the DoD and civilian agencies with us today to share their thoughts on this topic. Before we get started, I want to offer special thanks to Kim Eastridge from ATARC and Connie Coleman and the entire ServiceNow team for helping to organize today's webinar. Our session is going to include a few poll questions, and you're going to have the opportunity for audience Q&A. You can submit questions for our panelists using the Q&A section of this platform, and be sure to answer the poll questions if you want to receive CPE credit. I'd now like for our panelists to introduce themselves. As I call your name, please turn on your camera and come off mute, and then share a little bit of background on what workforce topics you're focused on today. We're going to start with Bethany Blakey, who is the Managing Director for Innovation Adoption at the IT Modernization Center of Excellence. That's part of the Technology Transformation Service within GSA. Welcome, Bethany.
Thank you, Jonathan. And hello, everyone. Welcome to my car. As I'm parked in the parking lot of my dentist office, I was actually supposed to be off work today, but wanted to make time to participate on this lovely panel. So as Jonathan said, I'm with the Technology Transformation Service Center for Excellence, and I am not a technologist at all. The innovation adoption practice is really about all the suite of things that our technologists don't do, but are part of the IT modernization process, dealing with organizations and teams and individuals. We handle things from human capital issues to skill development issues, communications, business process issues, and organizational culture. We really sit at that intersection of technology and humans and organizations. So yeah, we are available. We do consulting services, basically internal consultants to all the federal government, but we also have launched an innovation adoption community of practice. So we are definitely in the community building business and sharing business. And we've recently launched some information and learning offerings that are free to folks, because we really are in the business of helping people across government get what they need to move into a tech adoption. And I'll pass it on. Thank you.
That's a great start. Thank you, Bethany, and appreciate your commitment to the federal workforce. It's awesome. Next up, I'd like Brigadier General Sean Campbell, who's the Director of Manpower Organization and Resources and the Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower Personnel and Services at the U.S. Air Force, to introduce himself.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. So that title's a mouthful, but if I just broke it down for you, essentially what we do is we do the human capital portion of the budget for the U.S. Air Force. We do organizational design and review for the Air Force at all levels across the organization. And we do what is known as industrial engineering, but we call it management engineering. It's the same thing for the U.S. Air Force to help us analyze some of the thorny problems that we have across the organization. And prior to coming back to the Air Force, I spent about 2 years out at the U.S. Space Force as the Deputy Chief Human Capital Office, helping them build the newest service in 75 years. And the big things that we're working on here are probably very easy to understand. We're thinking about Russia and Ukraine and China and those sorts of things. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the future of the Air Force in terms of what do we need to look like organizationally, and what does our talent need to look like in order to meet those challenges.
Thank you, Sean. Next up, Tracy D. Martini, who is the Chief Human Capital Officer at GSA.
Hi, thanks, Jonathan. It's exciting to be here. It's such a great panel. I am the Chief Human Capital Officer for GSA, so all of GSA's amazing 11,000 employees are under my care. Everything in my office that touches the employee runs through me, from recruiting and hiring, employee engagement, labor unions, benefits, training, development. So we are what I say the heartbeat of GSA, because we provide the necessary support to the Public Building Service and the Federal Acquisition Service and offices like Bethany's, because she's my partner in crime working in TTS. We provide GSA with their most valuable resource, the people that are GSA. And we are working at breakneck speed on a lot of really interesting and innovative ideas. Coming out of COVID, we are looking at ways to transform how we work as an agency. And one of the greatest things about GSA is we always lean forward. We want to be the living lab for the federal government to show how things can change and evolve in development, because I don't know if many of you know this, but the government moves kind of slow. And that's okay, because there's a reason for that, but GSA likes to live a little bit dangerously and show how things can be done differently within the same rules and wonderful things that we have that I know Tiffany's going to talk a little bit about. And we are there. So if anyone has an interest in learning more about employee categorization or how to manage a hybrid workforce, I would be more than happy to make connections offline, because we are in the business of spreading the gospel of distributed teams and learning how we can do this well. Because at the end of the day, we wrestle with the same thing Sean is. How do we envision what the future of the civil service will look like, whether it be at DoD or GSA or the Merit Systems Protection Board? And we know we have to stay competitive with the private sector. And one of the ways we are going to do that is by becoming as flexible and agile as possible. So thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. And second, what you said about GSA leaning forward, I worked at GSA during my federal career, and it was always at the forefront of adopting new technologies and approaches. So I know you're gonna have a lot to bring to the panel as we get started. But before we do that, we still have Dr. Tiffany Lightbourne, who is the Director of the Office of Policy and Evaluation at the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board, MSPB. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm representing the MSPB, which is a small quasi-judicial independent agency that's entrusted to protect merit through employee protection, mainly through appeals. But we also have this other mission of system protection through merit studies and oversight of the Office of Personnel Management. Our goal is really to protect merit system principles and make sure that we have an effective federal workforce that's free of prohibited personnel practices. And my group in particular are a number of research psychologists and folks who have an interest in researching HR issues that will inform federal workforce management practice, policy, law, and regulation. And where we intersect with technology is in two ways. One, we are looking at the ways in which human capital professionals utilize technology to get their jobs done, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities in that space. But we also look at, as many of my panelists do, what is the future of work where we can envision a government that is leaning forward in terms of tech adoption, but doing so in ways that enable the fair and equal protection of employees' rights as we both use technology in new ways, but also enable our missions to be accomplished in new ways as well. So if you haven't heard of MSPB before, I encourage you to go to our website, mspb.gov. studies to take a look at some of the work we do, some amazing data-driven articles that can help you think about how to transform your workforce for the future.
Thank you, Tiffany. And to everyone in our audience, if you can't tell, we have 4 experts, and this is going to be a great conversation. I want to get started, though, with our first poll question. As I mentioned, you have to answer the poll questions to get CPE credit. So if we can have that first poll question up. How would you change the hiring process in your organization? And I think this is going to be a really interesting one. Okay, so we'll have the answers up shortly. I want to get the conversation started, though. I'm going to go back to ask Tracy to get us kicked off. And this question is really around the hiring process. What do you think needs to change with the hiring process to work in our current environment with hybrid teams and hybrid work and people potentially all over the country supporting a single office or a single mission?
Oh, Jonathan, I love this question. And you might have to jump in and stop me so I don't suck up the whole hour, because this is a passion point of mine. First and foremost, I need everyone on this call to go and find your human capital representative, your HR specialist, and give them a virtual hug or thank them, because the amount of work they do with limited resources and a lot of what I call myths around federal HR is just, it's daunting. And the reason why I say that is because the fact of the matter is human capital and HR in government is not broken. It operates the way it needs to protect the merit system principles, which Tiffany talked about in her opening statement. What we have seen over the past decade, possibly longer, is a complete underinvestment in human capital. We have not valued or used technology to leverage the way we can go out and recruit and hire. We had clunky systems that don't talk to each other. We don't train or invest in our HR staff to make sure that they're able to be agile and do the hard work that needs to be done and make that leap from being a transactional specialist to a consultant. And frankly, we need to have hiring managers that understand how the process works and are engaged with us so we can get the best quality candidates. I loved the questions you had in your poll because there are a lot of innovative practices being developed. And I want to talk quickly about one that's happening right now at GSA. We're running a government-wide, what's called a SMEQA process. It's a subject matter expert quality assessment where we are running it to recruit entry-level acquisition specialists. And acquisition, of course, is a GSA business, but it's also a mission-critical occupation for every government agency. And we are going to share that certificate with 6 other agencies that want to tap in. And we are looking at this as a way to do bulk hiring, but it is bulk hiring with a purpose. We are saying, all right, we need to rebuild the civil service. Let's put the laser focus on entry-level talent. Those are the folks that we need to come in and groom and train, and let's hire a lot of them. And let's follow an assessment process that makes sense. You know, there was a whole lot of fanfare back in 2011 when people said, oh, no more KSAs, that's great. That was one of the dumbest things we could have ever done, because now everyone thinks they're an expert and you get thousands of applications for one position. And because we do have to follow merit principles, everyone has to be adjudicated. So there's ways we can be more agile, and I look forward to using technology.
Yeah, so I want to just refer back to the poll that was up there. You saw, I think everyone had a chance to see the results. And while I love the idea of bulk hiring, only 6% of our audience thought that the ability to share hiring certificates was what was needed. Thank you for putting it back up. But it's this idea of strategic recruitment and using technology. You referenced technology. So Tiffany, I know you have a lot to offer here too. I don't know if there's anything in the poll you want to react to or build on Tracy's remarks, but we'd love to hear from you next.
I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on some of the challenges that Tracy mentioned. And at MSPB, we do a survey every 2 or 3 years called the Merit Principles Survey that goes out to all federal employees. Encourage you to take it when it comes your way again. But on that, we ask a number of questions about the hiring process and ask folks what needs to be adapted and where their difficulties lie. And we get like 4 types of responses. One has to do with the assessment process. We hear managers saying that the most difficult task they face is getting a pool of quality candidates. And we think that the reason for that is because agencies still rely too much on assessments that measure things like training and experience rather than potential and actual ability. Good assessments, when they're utilized, really make valid distinctions among applicants and allow us to identify people who are going to be able to hit the ground running and be most successful in the job. But we typically take sort of an easy way out and do resume reviews and self-rated occupational questionnaires as the predominant ways we rate and rank applicants. And so the problem with that is that we need things that are a little more valid, like job simulations, structured interviews, or USA Hire type examinations. But for small agencies like the one I'm at now, sometimes you don't have the expertise or money to develop better assessments. And OPM is working on this, making sure that we can improve the quality of our assessments. And OMB is also working on some things called SMEQA, which is a process of getting subject matter experts involved in the rating and ranking of applications. But it takes a lot of effort, and it's been a problem that's been a part of federal hiring for a long time. The second area that we tend to hear a lot of problems with is timeliness. We've got to figure out how to bring our new hires on more quickly. Over the last few years, we've seen an average of it taking about 100 days for someone to make it through the federal hiring process. And in a tight labor market like we're in now, we can't compete in terms of immediate salary all the time. Our benefits are definitely competitive though, but leaving an applicant hanging for 100 days, they've got to have a way to kind of really sustain themselves while they're going through a federal hiring process. And for most people, if you don't have a job, the idea that you might have to spend 3 or 4 months on your own dime waiting to hear back about whether you got a federal job it is a little excessive. And that leads to the next area that we tend to find in our data is applicant friendliness is a problem. That even though we know that we need to fill our talent pipelines, we know that 7% of the federal employees are under 30, but are we really going to get people who are under 30 going through the federal hiring process when we know that it's not as streamlined as it could be? We don't use cutting edge tools that they may be used to. Heck, people don't even date the way they used to. They're looking for apps to be able to find jobs and matches and accept resumes and communicate with applicants. And a lot of times our applicants feel like they apply for a federal job and then it goes into a black hole. And if you think outside the box, there have been a number of agencies that have been trying to do things a little bit differently. And one example of this was DHS when they did some of their cyber recruitment fairs back in 2016, where they announced jobs ahead of time. They had key players at the fair, including HR, security, and the CIO, along with the hiring managers. HR accepted the applications, reviewed calls on the spot. They brought the resumes to hiring managers to see if they wanted to make interviews. Once the interviews were completed, the hiring managers could make a tentative job offer. And then candidates were fingerprinted and started filling out EQIP, which is their security paperwork. That sort of example showed that you could complete a hiring process that typically takes 4 to 6 weeks in 2 days. And really thinking about ways we can redesign our hiring process to be more applicant friendly is another desire. And then the last area we hear about is a little sensitive, and it has to do with veterans preference. Agencies are telling us that it's really difficult to hire non-vets into competitive service positions. And I really feel it's more related to the first point that I made, that it's not about getting veterans into positions, it's about getting veterans who are well suited to positions. And if you have good assessments and you identify your critical skills you need to do a job, then you're going to be able to distinguish amongst your veteran candidates who's most likely to be successful in the role. So those are some of the things that we hear from our research.
Thank you, Tiffany. That's a lot, and there's a lot for us to build on there through our conversation. I want to build on that last point, which was something you had reiterated in the beginning. It's about assessments, and I want to see if Bethany has something to offer there. We talked previously, Bethany, about assessments and how we look at these applicants to see that we're getting the best people. So please build on that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, to both Tracy's and Tiffany's points, that we do rely heavily on self-reporting. Yes, I am absolutely an expert in this thing. You should hire me, and you can write a resume a beautiful resume and with a limited interview process, we don't know as much as we actually need to know to hire the best people. And it is subjective. We know a lot about the interviewing process. So much of there's a tremendous amount of bias involved in the interviewing process, where it's that rater bias, the same kind of rater bias that we have when we're doing performance evaluations. It's a real problem. There's a kind of a growing field really of assessment platforms and services out there where we can actually, if we can figure out ways to leverage them, we might be able to offer more objective assessment opportunities, particularly in some of the hard science spaces, data science spaces. Listen, you have to be able to use certain technologies in a certain way to perform a certain task. And I don't want to endorse any product that's out there, so I'm not going to name any names, but there are some products and platforms out there, some of which are free, frankly, where you can have people take these assessments on specific skills, but it requires the hiring manager actually knows what skills they need to actually do the job to advance the mission work that they're after. It's a little bit more upfront work. It's not resume review. It's not, oh, that was an interesting conversation, so I'm going to hire them because they fit in with our organization. But there are obstacles to that, though. There are legal obstacles. What happens to the data when someone's on a platform taking this assessment? Now they've captured data from an applicant. So there are a lot of issues to work out logistically, but the field and the technology and the assessment experts out there are developing a lot of tools that I think we can start to take advantage of.
So a point Tiffany made was not all agencies can afford these tools, but you noted that there's some that are free.
Yes.
And I hope, maybe that's something we can talk about after the fact, or we can share some information out, because that's assuming that the data is secure and whatnot. What a great resource for agencies as they think about the potential of incorporating these capabilities.
And I just want to very quickly say that, like, I'm giving examples on the data science side, but what we know from organizations like the World Economic Forum, there are some basic universal, just modern skills that almost everyone in the workforce needs to have. And, perhaps there are instruments out there that we can use as well for things like problem solving, critical thinking, basically just sense making, decision making. These are skills that everyone in the workforce needs to have. And we assume a lot when we read a resume, but I think there are better ways that we can know. Now it requires, again, a lot more upfront work and a lot more effort. But when we're hiring folks into long-term positions, I think it's worth the investment.
Thank you, Bethany. Sean, I want to give you a chance here and pick your brain on remote work. So we no longer have to have employees all in the same geography. There's a lot of flexibility. We could theoretically have job vacancy announcements that don't include a location or include all the locations and pick the best person, irrespective of where they are, but that creates other challenges. I'd love to get your perspective on this or some of the other topics, and with the DoD lens.
Sure. Our problem is a little different because the primary military profession requires kinetics, so we have to be down in the patch of dirt as opposed to distributed. But for our staff functions, there's a lot of opportunity for full-time telework or remote work, which are of course different. And so one of the things that we did as we were developing the staff for this U.S. Space Force is exactly that. We were agnostic about where you were so that we could hire the right talent for those positions. So any number of my teammates that are connected to the staff here in Washington, D.C. or across the country, in L.A., in Colorado Springs, in Denver. I even have one of our employees who lives full-time in Korea. And so we were able to make those things work. And then I would just say on the recruiting side of the equation, we have to think differently. The industrial age model of going out and brick and mortar and having job fairs, which are all good, we have to add to that. So we use a digital tool. I won't name it, but we use a digital tool that helps us go into geographic areas and look for density of individuals that we're looking for to recruit, both on the civilian and the military side of the equation. And we had this discussion about the propensity to perform as opposed to just a static test. that looks at what you know today. Now, we're required by law to apply a particular vocational aptitude battery as we try to find our military recruits, but that is a data point of one. So we are exploring what are the propensity to succeed instruments that we can use. So when we look at demographic areas where underrepresented communities tend to pool, it gives us an ability to actually target inside that community and pull out applicants. And Tracy and Tiffany both talked a little bit about the cumbersome system that we have to find talent and to get you on board. So one of the things that we beta tested in the Space Force was we did not use USA Jobs as our platform. We do all of our hiring through LinkedIn, which allows us to actually do some analysis on the platform and seek people as opposed to just waiting for you to go to USA Jobs and put in your application, which takes forever to do. And we digitally bring you on board. So once we've hired you and you have your JTO, your tentative job offer, we're able to start that onboarding process, which increases your satisfaction about coming into the Department of Defense, where we say we're highly data and digital literate, and we are at the cutting edge of technology, yet you show up and we give you a laptop that's probably older than the one you have at home. And so we're changing those dynamics.
And that's a great point. The technology people use has an impact on not just how effective they are in their jobs, but how they feel about their jobs. We're doing some unrelated research on Gen Z retention, and we find time and again that this younger generation of workers expect technology that they use at work to be the same kind of technology they use at home, apps,
Exactly.
and quick. And so if we're not thinking about this, we won't have people to come behind us. Tracy, I want to jump back to you. There was something you wanted to share about USA Jobs.
Yeah, so I just, I always, again, this stuff gets me so excited. I always want to be really careful that, the tools we have are based on what we can financially afford and what we are trying to do best point in time. And I love what Sean said about also using other tools. At GSA, we do use USA Jobs, but that's the receptacle to accept the application. There is nothing that says we can't aggressively target recruitment using LinkedIn. I just had a session where I told every GSA employee, you are a recruiter for GSA. Go out there and bring us talent. And there are opportunities that we have to be flexible, such as using direct hire authority. But at the end of the day, and I'm going to get all excited, and you'll have to all, excuse me for a minute. It comes back to the merit principles, because what I often hear from hiring managers is, wow, you gave me 200 candidates that were deemed best qualified, but they all suck. Go out and do it again. What they're really saying is the contractor I wanted didn't make it, or I don't want to go through veterans Passover. So first off, everyone needs to understand there is no shortage of talent. We have to get out of our own head and figure out how we're going to recruit people. The second thing I want to say is, if for entry level, those of you that are hiring pathways, shocker, they're not going to come in knowing the federal government. Bethany made an outstanding point. You're training and hiring for aptitude. Can they come in and play well with others? Are they willing to learn? Are they agile? That means putting resources towards training and development. And my final point, and I will get off my soapbox, is hiring managers in the government suck. This is not a collateral duty. If you are a manager in government, it is your job, your responsibility to hire, train, retain, develop staff. If you don't want to do it, give up your management role. We have enough dead weight in the SES and at the 14 and 15 level. Get out of our way, because you make it much harder.
I love your passion, Tracy. There's a lot of hand clapping all over.
I'm glad she said SES not generals. Thank you.
So any man that carries a weapon, I will never, ever disparage you. But I want to use this anecdote, because to me, this is emblematic of the veteran's preference. I am the child of a veteran. My father retired as a command sergeant major, which, for those of you that don't know, is the highest you can go as an NCO in the Army. When he came out, he had to retire at 60, wanted to get a job, could only qualify for 5s and 7s. I knew my father had led troops in Kosovo. And I knew it was because there was an attitude that veterans aren't worth anything. And that's where we have to get out of our own way. Veterans can come in and wipe the floor with the civilian workforce, but they have to be hired for the right jobs.
Right. So it's that upfront work that you're describing to write a good Tiffany was really talking about this quite eloquently, I think. Write good job requirements. That means there's a good PD. That means there's a good vacancy announcement. There's skill. There's a lot there. So we're talking about the best candidates coming in. We also want to make sure that we're hiring and we're recruiting from a diverse pool. So ultimately, the people that we hire have, we're hitting these diversity goals, and we think I don't want to say think, I use the wrong word. We know that diverse organizations perform better. So I would just like to build on that, and maybe go back to Tiffany, and how do we really focus on diversity in this early process, in those steps that you talked about, and instead of just talking about it, do it. What kind of recommendations did you offer?
We see in our research that there's a lot of opportunities to actually diversifying a workforce. It starts with recruitment, and I think you heard some great suggestions from a number of folks on the panel already. But if you have a really passive recruitment method, I used to call it post and pray, where you post on USA Jobs and you pray that your talent is going to come to you and just by osmosis have all the right skills and be able to hit the ground running. That's probably not going to yield you what you want. You're going to have active methods such as targeted use of social media, tapping into professional networks, outreach to affinity groups, really sort of knowing both the skills you need, but where they're likely to lie and where you can find potential, like Sean mentioned in some of his methodologies. You also have to look at your assessment and selection process. I think Tracy mentioned the perils of sort of favoring internal or connected applicants, right? Like you might have unnecessary requirements in your selection criteria that make it so that nobody but someone who already works for your agency is going to even apply for the job. And if you over rely on credentials that are supposed to be indirect indicators of skills, but you don't actually measure those skills directly, you could also be losing out on diverse talent. Mm-hmm. And then, self ratings, as Bethany mentioned, those only tell you what people think of themselves, but you also might run into cultural differences in how humble people are and how much they're willing to talk about what they can do and how they represent their past experience. I'd also mention that there are a lot of technology tools that are coming into place in that selection process that you also have to kind of look under the hood a little bit. There are AI type algorithms that are enabled to help with assessing talent, but you've also got to kind of watch out for potential dangers that they are hiring what has been in the job before. Yeah. So if it's been a non-diverse talent pool that has occupied an occupation, and those are the characteristics you're selecting for, you're basically sort of perpetuating whoever was in the job prior. And so you've got to evaluate diversity not only at the point of who's applying for your jobs, but also looking at how effective are your recruitment efforts at every stage of the hiring process. Where are you losing your diverse talent? Mm-hmm. Is it at the selection process? Is it at interview process? Like at what point does your pipeline fail to give you diverse talent? And I just want to mention one last thing about thinking about diversity, not only at the entry level or the hiring level. We've got to do more to make sure that diverse talent has a real competitive edge for selection into things like supervisory positions and for leadership opportunities. This panel today is extremely diverse, but we know from the data that there's decreased diversity at higher grade levels. Mm-hmm. And if you want to ensure that you have managers and executives who are diverse, then you've got to have a way of measuring competency, not based on who you know, or ways that might unfairly bias certain groups, but on an ongoing basis, make sure that leaders are aware of their responsibilities to foster diversity, that they use ways of selecting people for even things like experiential work opportunities, like details or special assignments that are unbiased, merit-based, so that people who are in the leadership pipeline are diverse, that they have the right skills, and that they're being noticed and being visible to senior leadership and able to gain the valuable skills that will take them to the next level. And I'll stop there, but I have more thoughts, but I'll stop there for others
No,
to chime in.
great stuff. I want to pause for a second and ask and have our next poll question presented. And this poll question is on hybrid and remote work, which we've talked about already. And this is, I think, part of the massive workforce transformation that we're undergoing. And Tiffany, I'd like for you to chime in on this topic of workforce transformation and talk about maybe how technology has been a challenge for prior HR modernization efforts. I'm sorry. Yep. Tiffany, if you could just build on that on HR challenges related to technology.
I think Tracy really hit the nail on the head when she said that there's been a real underinvestment in HR technology across the board. One of the things that we've seen is that the federal government as a whole has been slow to implement technology into hiring and training processes. If you ask a typical HR specialist how many systems they use to get their jobs done, or whether or not they're using legacy systems, you'll probably find that it's a profession that's using, really 1980s technology to do a 2020 job. And that's not fair to them, because we're expecting them to do not only high quality work, but really high volume work.
Right.
And when we do get technology insertion, we tend to try to take a paper process and automate it, rather than reinventing the process itself to make sure that it works for today's environment and is maximizing the utility of the technology. So some agencies, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I just wanted to ask Bethany and chime in from an innovation perspective. How do you, in your role, I think that you made a great point. You take the paper process and you automate the paper process. You've gotten nothing out of it. I know Tracy applauded that, and I agree. But that kind of innovation and change doesn't necessarily come easy. So, Bethany, what kinds of things are you seeing that help spur that innovation and change in thinking?
It definitely does not come easy, and we don't always work in an HR tech space, but we do have a couple organizations where we are working in that space, and it is a challenge from how they even think about what technology to acquire. These massive monolith systems where it's all or nothing that fail every time. I mean, every time we've got to even modernize how we think about acquiring the right sets of technologies that can be compatible with each other, that can work in sync with each other, but it's not an all or nothing system with a single point of failure that's going to shut down the whole operation. And then you have to wait for another giant pot of money to modernize again after you've already outlived the usefulness because you bought a single monolith system. I mean, we start off out of the gate, most agencies start off in the wrong space. And then we do get into issues with how that technology is then rolled out. The design there's always an ability to customize any technology that you buy. Engaging the workforce in the design of those customizations is critical. You cannot have a small group of people sitting in an office or sitting in an online meeting chat room designing everything independently. You're not getting, we know from decision theory and decision science that you don't get the best decisions when you have only a small group of people, even if they're experts. You actually need diversity and variety for good decision making. And then B, once you have purchased the system and you've customized it and now you're going to tell people how they have to use it, you've missed an opportunity, because now we have an adoption issue, right? We often in organizations, and we hear it all the time, well, we need leadership buy-in, we need leadership buy-in. Well, maybe, but you know what you need more than leadership buy-in? Workforce buy-in. Those are the people who actually have to use the systems to make work happen on a regular basis. So if you leave them out, we're going to have some issues. So a lot of what we deal with, again, in my world, I'm not dealing with the tech issue. We have colleagues who are dealing with the tech issue and what we're purchasing and how we're customizing it. I'm dealing with how we pivot our mindset about how we design and roll out that tool so it is more inclusive and has a lot of input from the workforce, so that adoption can take place, and not just adoption, but a sense of ownership, right? Where they're leaning into how to use different they're creating use cases
That's right.
when
That's
they learn what's in there.
What I love about what you said is it has this inclusive mindset of, if the workforce doesn't buy into to the genius leadership idea or strategy, you've already failed, right? And culture eats strategy. We've heard that, for 30 years. And the culture is one of employees are not engaged, you're gonna fail. So excellent points. And I just want to pivot over to Sean for a moment and just check in with you on some of what you're hearing, and also this idea of we have to retrain and reskill employees to meet the needs. We've been talking a lot about hiring, getting the right people in, but we already have great people in our organizations, and maybe the skills need to be updated so that great person can perform with the new technology that's brought in, or a new requirement that's emerged.
Yeah, so this hits right in the wheelhouse for my management engineers. So we have used Excel spreadsheets and ad nauseum. We build these great formulas, we have these great pivot tables, but what we haven't done, and we're in the process of doing this, is digitize that whole thing. So it gets scary when we talk to some of our engineers about R and Python and data literacy and digitization. And so you have to say what it is. You have to define it so they understand what we mean. And so we've broken this into 3 tiers. A couple of years ago, we started a deliberate data and analytics program. So you have sort of top tier, if you will, graduate level, PhD level, a data scientist. So you have that, and you can't have that at depth across an organization that has almost 700,000 people in it. So you have to find those skill pockets and train people to do that work. And then you have a middle layer where we put all of our engineers and say, okay, you're all practitioners, so we're going to upskill you in the way that you actually learn best. If you need to do that inside a traditional classroom, we'll bring that to you. If you prefer to do that in a distance learning type environment where you go onto a digital platform and do that, we connect you through Digital University and Udemy and some of these other applications that are available to you. And then we believe that there's a foundational layer where all airmen and guardians have to have a baseline understanding of what we think of as a foundational competency baseline of understanding what data is, what analytics is, what we mean by digital, which is not you being able to use an app on your smartphone. It's you understanding how that app works on your smartphone. So we're undertaking a deliberate effort really across the DoD, but I know for sure inside the Department of the Air Force, to connect people to those opportunities to develop those skill sets. And as I've often said, he who controls the data is going to win the next war. And so we have to have that capability across the entirety of the formation. But again, not everybody needs to have it at the PhD level. So that's how we're getting after it, is finding the gaps, developing people deliberately to be able to make use of today's tools and be prepared to flex and adapt to tomorrow's.
So, great points about data and process. And, I want to just call back to something that I think, I can't remember who said it, but the note was that we have these monolith systems. I think it was Bethany, and those fail, and they do fail almost every time. And, all of our agencies have made tremendous technology investments. Just to note, what I'm seeing is a recognition that while these big projects fail, the data in these different systems is locked away, and the employee experience is either through spreadsheets like you're describing, Sean, or I have the quote unquote swivel chair interface where I go from one system to the next to get the information I need either to do my job or manage my time in the agency. And there's more and more conversation about overlaying platforms on top of these things to bring the data together and create one place somebody goes. You don't have to replace the underlying systems. You can leverage that data, use workflow, use other technologies to create those experiences. And I just want to jump back to Tracy for a moment, because I've been watching you, and you've certainly I've seen the expression a couple of times where you wanted to jump in. So I just want to pull you back into the conversation and see what you've heard that you want to comment on.
Everything. It's all spot on. But there was, in particular, when Bethany was talking about having individuals buy in, and when it comes to technology, I would say that's something we're doing really well right now at GSA. We have a very good working relationship with our colleagues in the OCIO shop, because as anyone knows, and Jonathan, you know this as a former CIO at agriculture and GSA, they own and have responsibility for all of the systems, but we are very lucky that they understand that my team as the users need to be there for the development piece. And we also don't want to make it so cumbersome that we can't change things to help us meet the demands of whatever the particular job is, or wherever the direction pivots. But there's also something that's just so fundamental that everyone needs to understand. We have watched the absolute desecration of the civilian workforce the last decade or longer, because how can we operate with no consistent funding? And some years we don't even get funding until halfway through the fiscal year. I mean, that's insane. That's a recipe for disaster. So when I hear all these buzzwords like hiring's broken, I'm like, first off, it's not, but no kidding. And who broke it? Well, I'm looking down Constitution Avenue at the people that bear responsibility for that. Because what other major corporation would be expected to operate with inconsistent funding and sometimes no funding at all? Because let's also think about the times we've had full stop hiring freezes. Think of 2017 from January until May. Think of since 2013, 2 full stop shutdowns, October of 2013, January of 2019. Who else operates like that? No one. It's insane. And then you know what we do? We all pick on each other. It's HR fault. It's IT's fault. It's the CFO's fault. We're not holding the people that are really accountable. I said yesterday, and this could be my last appearance because one day soon I will be walked out of GSA, because I keep saying to people, get out of the weeds, get out of our way. We know what needs to be done. What we need is funding, and we need the ability to actually operate within the rules we have. No one said they are not our stop signs. I always say they're guardrails. I just want to make sure I'm operating and pushing to the limits where I'm not going to go to, MSPB jail. I don't want Tiffany to, show up at my door unless we're going to go to lunch. But, we want to make sure we are being true to the civil service and to merit protections, but we can be creative. We have 102 hiring flexibilities. My God, if we can't figure out how to hire people, I don't need any more. I need people just to listen and take our advice, but we all need money.
We all need money. Nothing truer has ever been, right? You can't do anything without money. And the money can buy technology and can buy other things that can improve hiring. I know, Tiffany, you have a lot to say about how technology can improve hiring. If you can help us close out this part of the conversation, I think that would be great.
And beyond money, we have to start making sure that HR is treated not just as an administrative function, but as a critical business process that underlies every federal organization. That has to change. IT has got to get to know the business of HR so that they can assist us with identifying technology, software, and tools that need to be expanded so that we're meeting our mission need to get in the best and brightest into the federal government. Some agencies are starting to use recruitment apps to recruit and communicate with applicants. That's going to yield them a younger applicant pool that is more capable with technology. But we also need to gear up more in terms of using these apps to post jobs, to accept resumes, to communicate with applicants, and to manage our hiring process. We should explore the use of AI and machine learning to assess applicants, not just word searches, but to really get at some of these real capabilities that may be deeper in applicants' resumes or in the submissions that accompany their resumes. We should use simulations and assessments. We've also got to get the word out on what federal jobs look like. And if we don't shore up our online branding and our social media presence, it's almost as if we don't exist to the current generation. Mm-hmm. And then we've got to use technology to be responsive to applicants. No more black box hiring, but really using technology to make sure that people are not left wondering where they stand in the hiring process. So there are lots of ways that technology can be our friend, but we're going to have substantial IT investment as well as awareness of what our needs are in order to transform in this way.
No, well stated, Tiffany. I want to pull up the next poll question, which is about workforce goals and things that are standing in the way of success. See what people think here. One that that I know to be true is we don't have a strong agency culture around workforce and around hiring. And I think you stated it quite well, Tiffany. The HR needs to be strategic and needs to not be an admin function. We're going to be challenged, and that's not the case in many agencies. IT, HR, contracting, these things are administrative functions and they're not the programs. And so many of our agencies are program driven. So we need to change culture. And I'm going to open this up because I think when all have some ideas, I'd like to start with Sean, perhaps, who helped to stand up a new agency in the Space Force. But how do you create the culture? How do you change the culture so HR is strategic and workforce is something we're all focused on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when you're starting a new military service and you're carving that out of existing military service members. So most of the military members that we brought over in the first 2 years were in another service previously. So most came from the Air Force, but we brought them in from all of the services, all of whom have their own unique cultures. So we were very deliberate early and often to think about what we call the guardian value proposition. Space is just different from the other services. And so we spent a lot of time understanding what are the foundational things that are unique to space so that we can get iconography correct, so we can get what we call ourselves correct, so that there's a way that we can anchor things early that people can identify with when you're building the service. And so that's something that we're thinking about in terms of bringing it back to the Air Force. And I'm not remembering which panelists mentioned it, but our presence, what we look like out on the digital platform, we are either big or scary or people just don't understand what it looks like to come to work for the federal government. So we're competing in that same space with people who spend a lot of time focused on exactly that sort of thing. And I think the Air Force Recruiting Service has come a long way in the last couple of years in really understanding that they have to be thinking differently in the way that they incentivize people to even give us a look, to come and look at us organizationally. And when we're trying to hire 40,000 people a year, you have a scale problem. So you can't do it in the same way we always have. And so you need to be everywhere where people are across the 5 generations that are in the workforce. It's a tall task, but it starts with, I want you to come join us, and that's a cultural issue. And so let us show you what our culture looks like instead of, let me just start with, here are the jobs we have.
So that's really a tremendous challenge. 40,000 people a year, worldwide, I assume. And, how do you can't get there without technology and reaching out to people where they are and being proactive. I have to believe the way many of the panelists discussed. I had just one follow-up question, Sean. As that 40,000 number, comes into focus each year, those jobs are all kinds of professions, I have to assume.
That's right.
Do you see that different professions require different kinds of approaches, from technology to some other sort of service job?
They do, and so especially when you're recognizing that inside the U.S. population, in the target age group, and this is really the military focus, and I'll bring it around to the civilian teammates as well, only about 23% of the population actually qualifies for military service. And then when you look down inside the numbers beyond that, only about 8 or 9% even have an interest in serving. So you have a doubly acute problem where I don't just have a population group of a certain number, it's a slice of that, and then a slice of that has an interest. So sort of this cultural idea of I have to generate interest, but I also have to recognize, and we discussed it a little bit earlier, that if I give you an IQ test, there are some unintended biases that are in those tests. We know that. We've been trying to refine that over time. But if I add that to a test that assesses your potential, what we call the Tailored Adaptive Personality Assessment System, it tells me that you have the propensity to succeed, but you haven't unlocked those capabilities because maybe you grew up in an area where the school systems weren't great. But you can do math and you can do other things, and you don't even realize you can do that. So we assess you that way, and then you get excited about it. And what the literature tells us is those people are not only more likely to succeed at a higher level than those that have a higher IQ score, they're also more likely to stay because you've unlocked something in them and you've generated interest in that human. So we're moving in that direction.
And we were talking about the topic is around culture, and I think when people hear and understand that's the approach, and that create and I hear in that opportunity, and I hear equity, and I hear something different than before. I think those are some things that help to change the culture about what the expectations are about how I can get in the organization. And then once I'm here, what I can do. I want to jump over to Tracy for a second. There was something about artificial intelligence, underlying all this in technology that I'd like you to comment on.
Yeah, I just was going to mention, we've talked about using AI at GSA, and we're very blessed. I always tell everyone we have the best CIO in government with Dave Shive. And Dave, all right. And Dave is very aggressive about always wanting to try new tools, but he's also been very candid. And we've talked about when you use something like AI, you actually have to teach the machine what it learns. So it's not a solution that happens overnight. And I think what happens is everyone is in such a rush to fix HR because I'm broken. They don't realize it's going to take a while to put those investments in there and to make sure you do it well. And I really also want to comment quickly on something Sean said. To me, that is the meat of the matter. Everyone thinks they want to be a federal employee because I think they think, it's just so sexy and glamorous to work with a 0.9% pay raise over the last 10 years. The fact of the matter is not everyone is going to be qualified. And what we need to sell is civil service. I have this argument all the time with my colleagues that want to recruit for IT talent. I am never going to financially compete with Google, Meta, Microsoft. The fact of the matter is, if that young IT talent, not even young, mid-career, whatever, they don't want to work for the federal government, no matter how much money I throw at them, I don't want them here. They need to be here for the mission. Those are the people that we want to attract and maybe make it easier for them to come in and out.
Yep. And to give them the opportunity to see the mission in action, something that I talked about throughout my career at USDA. You had to go see a farm. You had to go see a school. You had to see people, work in a meat processing plant to understand what we're doing. That's the best recruiting tool that the federal government has. And I'm glad that came up as part of this. Now, we only have a couple minutes left, and I do want to just run through everyone, starting with Bethany, for any final thoughts or advice to the audience that's trying to make these big changes. Bethany, please kick off this last set of questions, or last round, with final thoughts and lessons learned.
Yeah, I'll go kind of ambiguous and fuzzy here at the end. I encourage everyone to make friends in other functional areas other than the one you're in, because we can't solve any of the problems of technology, of workforce, of culture, of mission programs, fill in the blank. We can't do any of it without cross-functional expertise. This whole idea of, silo busting, I don't know, because of technology, like, really, are we still talking about silos? Like, I can reach out through email, through all kinds of other, talk to people, make friends in other functional areas, build relationships, learn and share, exchange information, because I think the best solutions come from that diversity of skill set and diversity of experience, where combinations of problems are being identified and people are gathering around it from different spaces.
Thank you, Bethany. Tiffany, what final advice do you have?
Getting off mute. I would just say, also fairly generally, keep at it. Not to be sort of cliche, using like the feminist cry, nevertheless she persisted. Like, these are big changes that you're trying to make, and you've got to really be looking at the long game. Large scale transformations of your workforce are going to take time and persistence. For many deep-rooted HR problems, there are no quick fixes. There's no magic technology. You may have to hire differently. You may have to train more. You may have to commit to new performance standards. You may have to acquire new technology or create new business processes. And all of that is going to take you time. But if you're really committed to it, and you make sure that your organization has buy-in around your shifts, you make progress visible, and you keep driving toward the big changes, yes, that commitment to modernization will be seen as real, and the workforce transformation that you seek will be something that your employees will all get behind.
Thank you, Tiffany. I think when employees see that it's real, that's when the buy-in starts, in my experience. Sean, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, so I usually we say, what's the objective? What is it that you're trying to get at the end, and then work backward, and don't let no be the thing that derails you. I really like this statement from FDR. Rules are not necessarily sacred, but principles are. So understand your principles, start there, understand what culture you want, what objectives you want, and I'm not saying paper over the rules, because I don't want Dr. I don't want Tiffany coming to see me either, an MSPB, but recognize that what you're really after are your principles. Stay focused on those, and then you find ways to get through the rules and make those necessary adjustments so you can be more agile and more adaptive and more capable of the things you're trying to deliver.
I love that. It's about the principles. And I would be remiss if I didn't allow Tracy to bring us home with one final thought. You've had great energy and passion.
Come work at GSA.
Yeah, come work at GSA. Okay,
That's right.
I can vouch for that, having worked there for some time. It's a great agency, and you touch a lot of other agencies. So, thank you. It's a great way to bring us home. And this is, I think, a call for federal service in general. Consider working for the federal government. Give it a try. You have opportunities that will surprise you. I found it in my career. So we're going to conclude with one last polling question, which is about CPE credits. And if you want to get CPE credits here, you have to answer this question. So thank you for doing that. I want to thank everybody on the panel for a really great conversation. I do these from time to time, and this, I think, was one of the best ones that I've participated in. Great conversation. And I want to thank everyone at ATARC and, again, ServiceNow for making this possible. We have some upcoming webinars. You can see Identity and Access Management Virtual Summit on August 2nd. Feel free to come back to ATARC and check that out. Lots of great conversation will be had there for sure. I want to thank everybody who was in the audience for joining us today, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.